The high plains do not whisper, they howl. Out here, silence is not peaceful, it hunts. When the snow falls deep, it covers everything. It buries trails, swallows fences, and hides the quiet secrets of broken hearts. The old mountain folk say the cold can kill the body, but loneliness is what takes the soul. This is the story of a woman buried by winter and by grief, and of how one small spark pushed back the longest night. Hattie sat by the window, but she was not looking outside. There was nothing left to see. The world beyond the glass had turned into a spinning wall of white and gray. The window pane was icy beneath her fingertips. She traced a line through the fogged glass and watched a single drop of water slide down like a tear. The cabin was quiet in a way that hurt. For 10 years, this place had been loud with life. Heavy boots on wooden floors, a deep laugh that rattled the plates, the smell of sawdust and pipe smoke. That was before. Now there was only the wind. It had been 6 months since she stood over fresh earth in the family plot. 6 months since the fever took him. Since that day, color drained from the world. The mountains were no longer proud or strong. They were walls closing in. The valley was not a home anymore. It was a cage. The sky above the cabin darkened into a bruised purple, thick with promise. Hattie knew that color. The air smelled sharp, like iron and ice. The trappers had a name for storms like this, the Great White Death. It was not a storm that passed through. It settled in and stayed. In other years, Hattie would have been moving fast. She would have chopped wood until her arms burned. She would have checked every latch and sealed every crack. But today she did not move. Her hands lay still in her lap. Her eyes drifted to the wood box beside the hearth. It was almost empty. A few twisted knots of pine sat at the bottom. Not enough for one night, let alone a blizzard. She knew what she should do. The axe was by the door. The wood pile was close, barely 20 steps away. But that short walk felt longer than 100 miles. Her legs felt heavy, pinned by sorrow colder than the snow outside. "What is the point?" she whispered. Her voice sounded thin and brittle in the empty room. The wind slammed into the north wall. The logs groaned. Snow piled against the door, sealing the gap at the bottom. The light began to fade as the drifts climbed higher, creeping up the window until the lower panes disappeared. Hattie pulled her shawl tight and watched the fire weaken. For the first time in her life, she did not rise to feed it. She sat and waited for the dark. Time slipped away after that. The storm did not rest. It screamed around the cabin, shaking the roof beams until dust fell from the ceiling. By the second day, the gray light turned into thick darkness. Snow climbed past the windows and pressed hard against the walls. The cabin felt less like shelter and more like a cave buried deep underground. The cold moved like a living thing. It crept through every crack, up through the floorboards. Frost bloomed on the inside of the door like pale lace. Hattie could see her breath. Each breath came out in short white clouds. She sat in the rocking chair, wrapped in every shawl she owned, staring at the hearth. The fire was dying. The last knot of pine had burned down to glowing coals. They pulsed weakly, fighting the cold. She watched the red fade to dull orange, then to gray ash. A thin trail of smoke drifted up the chimney. Then there was nothing. The warmth vanished. The stone hearth turned cold and empty. A hard shiver shook her body, deep and violent. Under it, something else settled in, a strange calm. The struggle was done. No more choices, no more work, only the cold and the silence waiting beneath the wind. She rose slowly and crossed the room to the bed built for two by hands now gone. She did not remove her boots. She crawled beneath the heavy quilts and curled into herself. The sheets were ice cold. She closed her eyes and thought of her husband. She wondered if the earth felt this cold where he lay. "It is all right," she whispered. "I am just going to sleep." The cold crept through the blankets. Her toes went numb, then her fingers. The roar of the storm drifted far away. She let out a long breath and slipped into the dark. The storm broke on the fourth morning. The wind gave up and the clouds tore apart, leaving a hard blue sky. The sun rose bright but offered no warmth. The world below lay buried in white, flat, and endless. High on a ridge, a lone figure moved against the glare. Lachlan tested the snow with each step. Long ash snowshoes kept him from sinking, though the effort burned his legs. His beard was stiff with ice. A heavy pack pulled at his shoulders, full of pelts and trade goods. He was built for the high country, wrapped in thick buffalo hide with the fur turned in. He had tried to outrun the storm and failed. For 3 days he had waited it out in a snow cave. Now he moved again. He crested the ridge and looked down into the valley. He knew this place. He had passed through in the fall. There had been a strong cabin here and a woman chopping wood in the yard. She had waved. He had tipped his hat. Lachlan squinted. Something was wrong. The fences were gone beneath the snow. The barn was only a low hump. The cabin was nearly erased. Snow lay heavy over the roof. Only the peak and the stone chimney showed above the white. Lachlan stopped. He watched the chimney. In winter, a house breathes. Smoke should rise straight into the still air. Smoke means warmth. It means life. But the air above this chimney was empty. No shimmer, no scent of pine. Just cold stone against blue sky. Trouble, he muttered. A chimney without smoke meant only one thing. The fire was out, and when the fire died, people followed. He could keep walking. The trading post was miles away but reachable. He looked once more at the silent chimney, cursed softly, and turned downhill. The snow swallowed him to the waist when he reached the hollow. He unstrapped his snowshoes and pushed forward, breath burning his lungs. The cabin was gone beneath the drifts, erased except for that stubborn chimney standing like a marker in a graveyard of ice. Lachlan pulled a small iron spade from his pack and struck the crust. It cracked hard. He dug with steady rhythm, throwing snow aside, heat pouring from his body despite the cold. An hour passed before the blade hit wood. He cleared the door frame with his hands, scraped ice from the latch, and pried until the seal broke with a sharp crack. The door opened an inch. Stale, cold air spilled out. Lachlan shoved it wider and slipped inside. Darkness swallowed him. The air smelled of cold ash and damp wool. He stepped forward, boots crunching on frost. He saw the empty chair, the bare table. Then he saw the bed. A mound of quilts lay still in the corner. He pulled them back. A woman lay beneath, pale and still, lips blue, eyes sunken. He touched her cheek, cold as stone. For a heartbeat he thought he was too late. Then he felt it, a faint tremble. Oh, a breath, alive but barely. Lachlan moved at once. He knelt at the hearth, pulled tinder from his pack, struck flint to steel. Sparks leapt, a glow caught. Flame bloomed. He fed it carefully with the last scraps of pine. Light filled the cabin. Heat followed, slow but real. The house breathed again. He set snow to melt in a kettle. He crumbled dried meat into the water. Steam rose, thick with life. The fire grew stronger. Frost wept from the windows. The darkness pulled back. On the bed, Hattie stirred. The crackle of flame reached her first, a sound that should not exist. She opened her eyes to flickering light and shadow. A man stood by her hearth. She thought she must be dead. Not today, he said gently. He lifted her and held a cup to her lips. The broth burned her tongue and warmed her chest. Life flowed back with every swallow. Tears filled her eyes. "Why?" she whispered. I was ready. The fire was out, he said. A house needs a fire. The wood would not last. Lachlan saw it at once. Without a word, he grabbed the axe and stepped back into the white glare. The door shut. Hattie lay listening, fear tight in her chest. Then she heard it. Thud. Crack. The sound of wood splitting rang through the cabin, steady and sure. Hattie closed her eyes and let the sound carry her. It was the sound of safety, the sound of someone refusing to let winter win. Outside, Lachlan swung the axe again and again, telling the cold it was not finished here. The sound of the axe did not stop. It stayed steady, solid, like a heartbeat outside the walls. Hattie lay beneath the quilts, her breath slowly finding a rhythm to match it. Thud, crack, thud, crack. Each strike pushed the silence farther back. Each split log told the cold it was not welcome. She had not heard that sound since before the fever, since before the ground closed over the man she loved. Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes, soaking into the pillow, but this time they did not come from despair. They came from memory, and from something fragile and new. The door finally opened, sending a rush of cold air into the cabin. Lachlan stepped inside, his arms full of fresh split logs. Snow clung to his boots and beard. He crossed the room and dropped the wood beside the hearth with a heavy clatter. The sound was loud, messy, alive. He knelt and fed the fire until it roared bright and strong. Heat rolled outward, pushing the cold into the corners where it no longer ruled. "Rest," he said, glancing at Hattie. "The fire will hold now." She did not answer. She watched him through heavy lids as he moved around the room, checking the door seal, clearing ice from the latch. He worked without hurry, without asking permission, like a man who understood that survival did not wait for polite words. When the fire was settled, he turned to the kettle, poured steaming broth into a tin cup, and brought it back to her. "Slow," he said, "little at a time." She obeyed. The warmth spread through her chest and into her limbs. The fog in her head thinned. She became aware of the ache in her body, the deep bone-tired pain that told her she was still alive. When the cup was empty, she leaned back against the pillows, exhausted. Lachlan stood and looked around the cabin. His eyes went to the wood box, nearly empty, then to the shelves, bare of food. He frowned, not in judgment, but in calculation. He took a lantern from its hook, lit it, and stepped back outside without a word. Hattie lay listening to his footsteps fade, fear fluttering in her chest. The silence tried to creep back in, but the fire snapped and popped, holding the dark at bay. She clung to that sound until the door opened again. Lachlan returned with dirt on his boots and a sack over his shoulder. He set it down and unpacked potatoes, onions, and a slab of salt pork. He worked like he had always belonged there, moving between table and hearth with quiet purpose. Soon the cabin smelled of frying meat and onions. It was a thick, rich smell that made Hattie's stomach tighten painfully. She watched him eat first, proving the food was real. Then he brought her a bowl. She ate slowly, savoring every bite. Each mouthful anchored her more firmly in the world she had been ready to leave. Night fell early. Outside, the cold tightened its grip again, but inside, the fire held strong. Shadows danced along the walls, no longer threatening, just moving. Lachlan sat in the rocking chair, cleaning his knife. Hattie lay back against the pillows, strength returning in small pieces. "You got a name?" she asked finally. He looked up. "Lachlan." "I'm Hattie." He nodded once, as if fixing the name in his mind. The silence that followed was not sharp. It was shared. In the days that followed, the storm eased, but the cold remained. Lachlan stayed. He did not ask how long. He did not explain himself. He simply stayed. Each morning he split wood until the pile grew tall again. He shoveled snow away from the wall so the cabin could breathe. He sealed cracks with wax and tallow, stopping the wind that had haunted Hattie's nights. Hattie grew stronger by inches. She moved from bed to chair, from chair to table. Her hands shook when she worked, but she worked anyway. She watched Lachlan as he fixed things her husband had meant to fix. A drafty window, a table leg that had always wobbled. He repaired them with care, not rushing, not boasting. He made the house stand straight again. One morning, sunlight cut through the windows for the first time in days. Dust motes floated in the beams. Hattie stood at the door, wrapped in her shawl, and looked out at the world. Snow still covered the valley, but the sky was clear and blue. Smoke curled from her chimney, rising steady and proud. She felt something loosen in her chest. "We're still here," she whispered. The feeling did not last. Later that day, guilt came crashing down on her like an avalanche. She sat at the table, hands gripping the edge, nausea rolling through her. How dare she eat? How dare she feel warmth when her husband lay cold in the ground? Lachlan came in behind her, stamping snow from his boots. His presence too full of life. "You should go," she said sharply. "The weather's better. You have places to be." He turned slowly, reading the fear beneath her words. Why? He did not argue. He went to the hearth and added a log, watching sparks fly. "The pass is still bad," he said evenly. "I'd die trying." It was a lie, and they both knew it. The road would open soon. The excuse would melt away with the snow. Hattie's chest tightened at the thought. She wanted him gone, so she could sink back into the quiet. Being alive hurt too much. "I'm staying until the thaw," Lachlan added. "The winter isn't done with you." Her strength left her all at once. She buried her face in her hands and cried. Lachlan did not touch her. He stood guard by the fire, letting the warmth do its work. When the tears passed, he went back to fixing the cabin. He sealed another window. He stacked wood with care. He moved through the house like someone who believed it was worth saving. Hattie watched him and understood something she had forgotten. Love was not loud. It was work. It was choosing to mend instead of abandon. The Chinook wind came in the night, warm and heavy. Snow melted fast, dripping from the eaves, rushing down the slopes. The valley began to breathe again. The creek roared. Patches of dark earth appeared. With the melt came fear. Lachlan stood outside one morning, inspecting his snowshoes, eyes on the ridge. The trail was showing through. The road was calling him back. "The mud will be bad," he said, half to himself. "The mud dries," Hattie replied softly. Silence fell between them. She saw him begin to pack that afternoon. Each strap he tightened felt like a wound reopening. When she finally spoke, her voice shook but held. "I can't stand the quiet anymore," she said. "Not without you." Lachlan stopped. He turned, searching her face. He stepped closer, careful, like a man crossing thin ice. "I never planned to stay," he admitted. "I didn't think I had the right. It was a tomb before you came," Hattie said. "Now it's a home. Stay." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he nodded. "I'm done wandering," he said. The kiss they shared was gentle, steady, full of promise. Outside, the snow continued to melt, feeding the valley back to life. Inside, the fire burned bright, no longer fighting alone. The longest night had passed, but the work of living was just beginning. Spring did not arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, the way healing often does. The snow pulled back inch by inch, revealing wet earth and broken grass beneath. Water ran everywhere, carving new paths through the valley. The cabin stood firm against it all, smoke still rising each morning, steady and sure. Lachlan stayed. At first, Hattie woke every day expecting to find him gone. Each morning she opened her eyes with her heart already braced for loss. But every time, there he was, by the hearth feeding the fire, outside splitting wood. At the table, mending a strap or sharpening a blade. The fear eased slowly, replaced by something fragile and warm. They learned each other in quiet ways. Lachlan learned how Hattie liked her coffee weak and her bread crisp. Hattie learned that Lachlan woke before sunrise no matter how late the night before, and that he talked to animals as if they were people. They did not rush each other. They let the days stack gently, one on top of the other. Work filled the hours. Lachlan repaired the south side of the roof before the melt could weaken the beams. He reset fence posts buried by the drifts. Hattie tended the house again, airing blankets, scrubbing floors, letting light into rooms long kept dark. Each task pulled her farther from the edge she had once stood on. Some days were harder than others. Grief did not vanish just because love returned. There were mornings when Hattie woke with a heavy ache in her chest, memories pressing down on her like fresh snow. On those days, Lachlan did not push. He did not try to fix her pain. He simply stayed close, splitting wood or working at the table, present and solid. When the ground softened enough, they walked together to the family plot. Hattie stood before the marker, fingers curled tight in her shawl. Lachlan stayed a few steps back, giving her space. The wind moved gently through the grass, no longer screaming, just passing through. "I lived," she whispered. "I didn't mean to, but I did." The guilt rose again, sharp and biting, but it did not break her this time. Lachlan stepped closer and placed a steady hand on her shoulder. He said nothing. He did not need to. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his quiet presence. As the weeks passed, the valley turned green. Grass pushed through the mud. Birds returned, loud and insistent. The world moved forward, uncaring but alive, and slowly so did Hattie. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the mountains gold, Hattie stood at the hearth watching the fire. It was smaller now, controlled, no longer fighting for survival. Lachlan sat at the table, carving a small wooden horse from a scrap of pine, hands steady and sure. "I used to think staying alive meant being strong alone," Hattie said softly. Lachlan looked up. "Most folks do. But I was wrong," she continued. "I needed help, and that doesn't make me weak, no," he said. "It makes you honest." Summer came full and bright. The garden grew thick with life. Squash vines spread wide, corn stalks rose tall, and beans climbed their poles like they had somewhere important to be. The cabin changed too. A lean-to appeared on the east side for tools and supplies. The barn roof was patched. Laughter returned, slow at first, then easier. They did not mark the day Lachlan stopped thinking of the road as home. It simply happened. The pack stayed in the corner untouched. The snowshoes hung unused. The mountains no longer called him away. They stood guard instead. Years passed. 5 summers after the winter of deep snow, the valley looked different, fuller, alive. The cabin no longer crouched against the mountain like something afraid. It stood proud, surrounded by green and movement. Wind chimes hung by the door, fresh-cut wood stacked neatly by the wall. Hattie stood on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. The sun was warm on her face. She watched a small boy tumble through the grass, laughing so hard he could barely stay on his feet. His hair was wild, his knees scraped, his joy loud and unrestrained. Lachlan came up from the barn, steady as ever, sweat darkening his shirt. He paused to watch the boy, a soft smile pulling at his mouth. He no longer looked like a man passing through. He looked rooted, grounded, like the mountain itself. Hattie leaned into him as he reached the porch. Words were no longer necessary. They shared silence easily now. A thin wisp of smoke curled from the chimney, even in the heat of summer. It was not needed for warmth, but it remained, a promise. The fire would never go out again. The boy ran up the steps and collided with Lachlan's legs, wrapping his arms tight. Lachlan laughed, lifting him with ease. Hattie watched them, heart full in a way she once believed impossible. This family had not been planned. It had been built from snow and loss, from kindness and stubborn will, from one man who refused to walk past a cold chimney, and one woman who learned that asking for help was not the same as giving up. The high plains still howled, winters still came hard and cruel, but inside the cabin, the hearth burned steady, and that made all the difference. Out here, survival was not just about enduring the cold. It was about letting someone stand beside you and help keep the fire alive.